consolidation that's happening right now in the automotive service and collision repair industry is going to, or more likely already has, impacted your business and your plans for the future. Our next speaker is going to give us some insight about what's driving this consolidation, how it's likely to play out, and what it will mean for you. So, Brad Mewes is a management consultant, strategist, and author of the blog Supplement Financial Insight for the Collision Repair Professional. He has a master's in business administration and finance and is a former equity research associate. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure you'll tell us. He also grew up in his family's collision shop and grew it to a multi-million-dollar operation prior to founding Supplement. Please join me in welcoming Brad Mewes.
Thank you. Is everybody able to hear me okay? What are you on now? No? Yeah, okay, so definitely use the microphone. So, competing with consolidation, how my industry is consolidating. It's a happening topic right now, so I appreciate you guys being in here and taking the time to listen to what I have to say. So, Judelle kind of gave a brief overview of what I do and how I got here. But a little bit about me. So I have an MBA with a specialization in finance, an undergraduate in international economics. As Jill said, before doing what I do now, I was an equity research analyst. So equity research is basically the guys you see who work on Wall Street and analyze companies and analyze their financials. I was doing that sort of work. I grew up in my family's business. And that is actually a picture of me. So I can literally say that I have been doing body work since I was in my diapers. Now, I am a horrible body tech, so don't ever hire me to work on your car. But I learned how to run a business. I worked for my father for a number of years before I realized that just for me personally, I wanted to play a larger role than just being involved in our single location. So today we're going to talk about the state of the industry. Consolidation, it's a buzzword. We're in Abra's backyard. Does anybody here work for Abra, by the way? No Abra shops. Okay. So we're going to talk about a couple key things. State industry. We're going to talk about private equity, what private equity is, and how they're influencing the industry. We're going to be talking about this idea of the consolidation curve, or the strategic reasons that we're seeing the industry consolidate. And then talk about things that inferences we've been able to draw looking at other industries of where our industry may be heading. And then we're going to talk about growth options in light of this consolidating environment, and how do you grow and how do you compete in a industry that's consolidating. And then depending on time, and keep if I run a little long, make sure you just throw something at me, throw a spit water or a paper airplane at me. We're going to talk about what's it worth and talk about some valuation methodologies. So with that said, let's get right into it. So who here has ever worked in a shop like this? It's okay. I mean, don't be shy. This was a picture of my family shop from way back in the day. It looks nothing like that now. But I'm going to try and this is the industry now. And I won't show the whole thing because it's 3 minutes long, but you'll get the point pretty quick. So this is a fixed shop in the UK who has clearly invested heavily into automation and processes and equipment. My favorite thing here is the mobile spray booth that is on tracks and moves from car to car. Wow, that was my reaction when I saw it too. And so this is an example that I use in terms of how the industry has evolved. The picture I showed first was from the very, very, very early 1980s. So in 30 years, we've gone from that to this. And this business model is a very different, I have to figure out how to go forward. This business model is a very different business model. It's a much more sophisticated business model. It's a much more financially intensive business model. And so that business model has really come about as a result of consolidation, as a result of large financial firms, large strategic firms coming into the industry and investing large sums of money into industry, really changing the way things are done. So these are the big four consolidators. We all know Abra. We're all familiar with Abra. But we got Caliber, Service King, and Boyd or Gerber as they operate in the States. And these consolidators are really changing the way business is done in industry. And so Rex Green he's the managing director of the investment bank in Boston. He's does a lot of automotive stuff. For him, like a small deal is like a $100 million deal. He said recently that excuse me, within 10 years, he believes 2/3 of the revenue of the industry is going to be controlled by the top four consolidators, which is a pretty bold statement. And he went on to say virtually all of the revenues will be done by, all the carrier paid revenues will be controlled by the consolidators. Now Rex isn't one to prone to hyperbole. And so the reason that he's saying this, and a lot of other people are saying this, is because there's this idea of acquisitions. And so I'm going to use a lot of business corporate speak in the presentation, so if I say something you don't quite get, just raise your hand and say, hey Brad, what's that? But acquisitions, that's the hot buzzword in the industry right now. And so I thought this slide does a good job of explaining what an acquisition is. And an acquisition is, it's a discovery, for those of you in the back who probably can't read that, it says the discovery that you're no longer a big fish in a small pond, or even a small fish in a big pond, but a small fish in a big fish. And so that's how the consolidators have been growing in the past few years. And if you look at the trend, consolidation really took off in about 2012. There was a first round of consolidation in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then there were a couple of high-profile blow-ups in the early 2000s where companies went bankrupt. They basically ran out of cash, creditors closed the doors, and then consolidation stopped for a couple of years. And then it picked back up. And 2012 is really when it really started to increase in pace. And it's continued to increase ever since. So if you look at the growth of the big four consolidators, from the end of 2011 to the end of 2015, collectively they've tripled in size in terms of number of locations. They've grown effectively, collectively at a 33% annual rate, which is very, very rapid. And if you break it down and look at some of the individual operators, you can see Service King actually has grown sixfold over that time. Just astounding rapid growth. And that was then in 2015. And it's continuing. In 2016, the first quarter, to the end of March, those new locations, those acquisitions, the brownfields and greenfields are continuing by the big four. And looking at the data slightly differently, I thought this was very telling to show how effective that these companies have become at expanding their operations. In the first 3 months of 2016, the big four did opened nearly as many stores as they did an entire year of 2012. So they've become very effective at expanding. They've become very effective at growing. They've become very effective at identifying and sourcing acquisition opportunities. And it's not just collision repair. If you look at the paint distribution market, you have the big four in paint distribution. You have Finish Master, NCS, LKQ, and Single Source. Well, I misspoke. Because NCS and Single Source just merged a couple days ago. Finish Master has acquired Annex as of a couple days ago, and Color Master, a West Coast and Texas-based distributor. So consolidation is taking place in the refinish market as well. As the adjacent industries that sell into the industry, as the collision industry consolidates, the adjacent industries are consolidating. And the history of paint distribution is very similar to collision as well, where they went through, that industry went through a wave of consolidation in the 90s as well. Parts distribution. So if you look at aftermarket parts, LKQ has become a massive player. In fact, LKQ is a company that has really embraced growth by acquisition. And it's a bit outside the scope of this presentation, but LKQ has completed over 200 acquisitions since the 1990s. 200. They've gone from $500 million in revenues in 2005 to $7.2 billion in revenues last year. And they're going to get bigger. They just acquired a multi-billion-dollar operation in Europe, in Italy, Southeast Europe, and they're going to be even bigger next year. In service, we're seeing the same things happen in the service industry as well. Monroe Muffler, publicly traded company that's growing very aggressively from acquisitions, doing about $1 billion in revenues a year, doing service, alignments, tires, shocks. These two gentlemen, Carl Icahn on the left, Warren Buffett on the right, are very, very involved and invested in the automotive industry. Carl Icahn owns Federal Mogul. You may have just heard about his recent acquisition of Pep Boys, spending over $1 billion to acquire Pep Boys, and what is going to make him a lot of money when he spins off, when he separates the parts and service business. Warren Buffett owns, obviously, Geico through Berkshire Hathaway. He owns a significant stake in Axalta, that's also private equity backed. And something that nobody really talks about in the industry, he owns, well, what was the Van Tala Group, it's now Berkshire Hathaway Automotive, the 5th largest dealer group in the US, who's also the 5th or 6th largest collision repair operator in the US. So what are the implications of these big moguls owning such large stakes in collision repair operations? Which brings me exactly to the next point. Private equity. So I mentioned there's a financial side to what we're seeing in the industry, and there's a strategic side of what's going on in the industry. And the financial side is that private equity is making large investments in automotive. Automotive in general, the entire automotive aftermarket tends to be very fragmented. And so, what is private equity? There's a lot of confusion often around private equity, how they work, how they invest, what they do. And I wasn't going to talk a lot about this, but I think it's important to hit on in that, so the way private equity works is private equity goes and invests in privately held companies. And they source those investment dollars through insurance company, pension funds, wealthy family offices, endowments, you name it. Anybody who has a pool of capital to invest will invest that capital across varying asset classes. So maybe they'll invest in real estate, they'll invest in the public stock market. Well, they'll also invest in the private stock market, the private equity market. So when you invest in the public stock market, you're buying equity. Private equity just invests in privately held companies. And private equity it's an interesting business model because how they invest is uniquely different from the way you and I might think about investing. So I was talking earlier this morning about this, and I didn't have a lot of slides on this, so actually I called up, I had to call home real quick and say, hey, guys, I need a little bit of detail on how private equity works. And it must have been due to the time change, so I live in California. I must have called them too early because this is what they sent me back. I said, thanks, guys. But to be fair, I guess it is a simplistic. I did ask for a basic, simplistic definition of how private equity works. And effectively what private equity does, they invest in companies, let's call it, $100 million company. They hold on to it for 3, 5, 7 years, and then they sell it for $140 million after the company's grown and expanded. Now I said, guys, could we maybe just give me a little more detail? And then they came back with this. So we're gonna have a talk with some people when we get back. But this is a good overview of some of the nuances of private equity. What makes private equity so attractive as an asset class is that they measure their returns in multiples of dollars generated. So you and I will measure, if we get a 10% return on our stocks, we're pretty stoked. If we get a 12% return on our investment in our business, if we get a 12% net return, 15% net, maybe even a 20%, then we're pretty stoked. These guys are getting returns that they measure 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times their investment. And the way they're able to do that is how they're structuring their investment. And for those of you who ever have the opportunity to negotiate with a private equity group, and I hope you do, because it's interesting, you'll actually never see this side of the transaction, because the structure is completely blind to the target company. But similar to buying a house. So when we buy a house, it's traditional to put about 20% down, and then we let the bank finance the rest. It's a very similar model when the private equity groups invest in the company. So we hear, for example, Service King bought the majority stake in, Carlyle bought a majority stake in Service King. We didn't hear the number, but let's say $500 million, just theoretically. Well, that $500 million, Carlyle doesn't actually put $500 million of cash into that business. They maybe put $100 million in, and then use the other $400 million, leverage their banking relationships to finance the rest. What makes this model very attractive is that as the company grows over time, and as that company goes from, and using the example here, from 100 million to 140 million, the value of that equity, the value that the private equity group owns after paying off the debt increases substantially. So, as you see here, assuming not even a penny of debt is paid down during the holding period, when that company is sold, the equity portion goes from 20 million to 60 million, generating 3 times the invested capital, the initial invested capital. So it's a very, very attractive model, and that's why private equity groups are able to pool so much capital, because these public pensions and public investors are looking for high returns on their investment. And private equity groups are able to, when done right, are able to generate 30, 40, 50% annualized returns. And private equity is all over the automotive aftermarket. It's all over collision repair. Abra, Service King, and Caliber are all owned by private equity groups. And we see CCC is owned by Leonard Green and another large private equity group called TCP. Joe Hudson Collision Center in the Southeast is owned by a group called Carousel Capital, who's very involved in automotive investments in general. Cadel's was owned by KCB Management, which was a private family office until they exited last year. Mako and CarStar are owned. We all heard about the Driven Brands acquisition. Well, Driven Brands is owned by Rourke Capital, which is another private equity group. Parts Channel, Radiator, Autotex, Van Tile, Berkshire Hathaway. Not really private equity, but some similar characteristics. And these private equity groups have a lot of money to invest. And by some estimates, $1.3 trillion of investable capital. In North America, the collision repair industry is $36-ish billion total market size. It is $1.3 trillion of total investable capital. So it really shows the reach that these groups have. So that's the financial side. But what about the strategic side? What about these large companies are coming in, changing the industry, and I'm sure there's going to be questions, why in the world, I struggle to make money in this industry, why are these multi-billionaires doing this? And we'll get to that later. But there's this idea of the consolidation curve, and industries actually consolidate relatively predictably over time. But before I get into that, I thought it'd be useful to look at what some of the key leaders of some of these big companies are saying about consolidation. to give us some insight into what they're thinking. Steve Grimshaw, CEO of Caliber Collision, says, I believe there will be more consolidation. Let's face facts. There are a lot of independents out there. Dealerships are struggling in this environment. When you have a well-capitalized, multi-shop operation, that creates opportunity. Brock Bullock of Boyd says, we intend to double the size of our business over the next 5 years. He just said this a couple weeks ago. North America collision repair industry remains highly fragmented and offers attractive opportunities for industry leaders to build value through focused consolidation and economies of scale. We're going to get to that economies of scale thing in a second. The company is well positioned to take advantage of large acquisition opportunities. Dwayne Rouse of Abra says the industry has been fragmented and is in an overcapacity situation. The industry itself hasn't been growing quickly. The better operators are taking share from the marginal operators. And then Kathy Bonner, chairman or chairwoman, I guess, not sure what the title is now, but she says that the trend is for consolidation. The biggest question is who will be the successful consolidator, implying that even amongst the top of the top, the biggest of the big companies, they're even looking at who's going to survive this, which is has some interesting implications. And so why is it that all these leaders at all these big companies are so gung-ho about consolidation? It's not just because these private equity groups are flush with capital and need a bunch of money to invest. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It actually turns out industries consolidate in very predictable patterns over time. And so we actually, the fact that some of us, myself included, were surprised at how fast industry was consolidated, shame on us, because if we look at the data tells us that we should have expected this. And so what this is a chart of is at the turn of the century, the early 2000s, a couple of Harvard economists got together and they were looking at how industries evolve over time. And what they found was that these industries actually evolve in very predictable patterns. And so on the bottom is time, and on the vertical axis is degree of concentration. So that the higher up we go, the more concentrated the industry, the further out to the right we go, the longer the time period. So what they looked at is how concentrated are industries over time. And so they determined that there's this S curve that happens. And so interestingly enough, so you can see very highly consolidated companies, shipbuilding industries, shipbuilding, shoes, soft drinks, Coke, Pepsi, very, very consolidated. Back in 2000, unconsolidated industries were banks, insurance, telecom, airlines. Interestingly enough, those are all very consolidated industries now. Bank of America in the early 2000s was a small, local, Charlotte-based bank. And they rolled up the entire banking industry very, very aggressively in a matter of years. And so these things shift and change over time. But what I found really interesting is when you dive into this data, dive into this report, and you read between the lines, you actually see there's different phases of consolidation. There's different phases and there's different strategies that leading companies take to win in these environments. And so without getting into too many details, at the core there were two main things that successful companies in consolidated environments did. One is they developed economies of scale. They had an unrelenting focus on developing economies of scale. And the second one is they developed a core competency in using mergers and acquisitions to drive profitable growth. So that's a lot of business speak. It's a lot of corporate speak. A lot of business school speak. So let's back up and define this. So an economy of scale. An economy of scale, the formal definition is the reduction in the average of marginal cost arising from an increase in size of an operating unit. So basically, the bigger you get, the lower your cost structure becomes. And so this makes sense, because if you think about Abra, for example, they're able to negotiate a deep discount on their purchases of paint materials. they have size, they have purchasing power, and they're able to reduce their cost. They also have management overhead. They have regional managers and executives that a smaller operation would not be able to afford. It would just be impossible, but they're able to afford this because they can distribute those costs over a very, very broad base of sales. And so what happens is their actual cost structure, the bigger they get, lowers down. The second thing is core competency. So the idea that the core competency is a fundamental knowledge, ability, or expertise that creates sustainable competitive advantage. And in consolidating industries, companies that focus on M&A, this becomes a core competency. And so if you look at the big consolidators, they've done a very good job of integrating mergers and acquisitions into their business process to drive growth and to drive profitable growth. And the reason is there's this idea of what I like to call this virtuous cycle of investment. And so the cycle of investment essentially works as this. Every business starts with some sort of investment. An entrepreneur sees an opportunity and makes an investment into the business. And they make that investment in order to develop some sort of competitive advantage. And they compete in the marketplace, and they're able, that competitive advantage allows them to generate profits, retained earnings. And those retained earnings are then invested back into the business, into growth, into acquisitions, into scale, into creating barriers of entry, which at this point allows a business to attract additional capital, additional outside capital, which allows the business to reinvest further into their business, to create further competitive advantage, to create further retained earnings, to reinvest into growth, acquisitions, and so forth. And the cycle is very powerful because where most small businesses get it wrong, they get stuck right here. Earnings never retained. Earnings are distributed to the owner, but never retained and reinvested back into the business. And so what makes this powerful is, who here has heard of the idea of the theory of the first mover advantage in business? So there's this idea in business that if you're the first mover, if you have an idea first and you get there first, that you have some sort of mythical advantage over your competitors. Well, that's a flawed theory. It's a horrible theory. It's absolutely wrong. The data shows that there's no such thing as a first mover advantage. Because what happens? You go there, you find this great thing, you get there first, and then what happens? You got a bunch of competition the next day. So it disappears like that. But the only area, the only area where the first mover advantage actually holds true is in building economies of scale. And it's because of this cycle. The sooner you start building, you get involved in this loop, the quicker it's an exponential process. So we're seeing that with the big consolidators right now. They're growing exponentially. And even the smaller companies who are trying to grow, there's a huge gap between the billion-dollar large consolidator and the number 5 privately held company is about $100 million to $120 million in revenues. So there's a huge gap. So the consolidators have seen this, and they continue to reinvest, and they continue to drive growth in the industry. Which leads us to what is a privately held business to do in this environment? What are the options? Well, there's effectively 3 options in a consolidated environment. You grow and you scale up and you compete on that level. You don't grow and you stand pat. And if you do that, you have to invest heavily in operational excellence. I'm not going to talk about that right now. There's a lot of people here who are going to be touching on themes like that. But you invest heavily in that, with the understanding that that investment will have diminishing returns over time due to the natural growth of major players in the industry. Or, if you don't want to reinvest in growth, or you don't want to reinvest in operational excellence, and operational excellence is like, not better than the guy down the street for you, but like the best in the country, then really the third option is you sell. And you take the future value of business and you recognize it now. Now, I'm not going to talk about selling. We do a lot of that. We help a lot of our clients manage that process. If you do want to talk about that, see me offline. There's a whole separate process on how you maximize your value in a sale process. I want to talk about growth and the idea of how you grow with this large consolidator next to you. In other words, grow faster, get out. That's the message I'm getting at. So I'm not going to get into. So if you guys want, email me and I'll send you the full slide deck. I don't want to get too much into Professor Brad, where I'm teaching a course on corporate strategy. But there's effectively 4 types of growth. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, and then if you want, shoot me an email and I'll send you the slide, and it has more details on there. And when I talk about growth, I'm really talking about growth in cash, growth in cash flow, because that's effectively how you grow the value of a business. So a quick lesson on valuation. If you want to increase the value of your business, you either increase your cash flow or you decrease your risk. And so there's ways to do both. And so really I'm talking about how do you increase your cash flow here. You can do it organically, which means organic growth means if you have 5 locations, then you just let your 5 locations stay at 5 and you increase sales at every location. You might be able to increase sales naturally 5, 10, maybe 15% a year if you're really kicking butt. You might have 1 year where you get a 20% bump if you get a couple of new DRPs or whatnot. But there's kind of a natural limit to how much you're going to be able to grow organically at any given location in a given business. You can improve your efficiency and you can drive down cost reduction. Same thing, there's kind of a natural limit to how far you can cut. There's only so much you can cut. There's only so much efficiency you can drive. There's only so many square footage at your shop. There's only so many hours in the working day. So you can improve that, and then we'll give you a short-term bump. And that's why I said reinvesting in performance, reinvesting in operational excellence has diminishing returns, because there's a certain point where you can only sharpen the knife so far. You can grow inorganically. And so inorganically would be new location development or through acquisitions. So you could do new locations, what we refer to as brownfields or greenfields, where you are developing new locations and staffing it. You diversify geographically, you diversify your customer base, but it takes a long time to get new development done. Has anybody in here done a brownfield, a greenfield, a new development? Nobody? Oh man, well, okay. Everybody, we have a lot to talk about. Or you grow via acquisitions. So you go out and you buy somebody else. Now, just a quick show of hands. Which of the 4 do you think acquisitions is the most risky? Who thinks acquisitions is the riskiest way to grow? Okay, who thinks new development is the riskiest way to grow? Okay, who thinks organic growth is the riskiest way? And who thinks efficiency and cost reduction is risky? All right, so so you guys are actually very attuned, which is good. New developments, it's perceived as risky, and I think what is oftentimes a confusion is that those new developments aren't necessarily risky as much as they are very cash intensive. In order to do a new development, you have to find a site, build a site, develop a site, get the permits, staff up, and find people to come in. It takes a long time. Interestingly enough, they actually have one of the higher returns over a longer period. Acquisitions are actually the most cost-effective, so one of the most cost-effective and one of the best ways to reduce your risk profile. It's also one of the quickest way to increase your cash flow. And so I have lots of details on here, like I mentioned. I'll send that to you, but I've already been rambling on for 40 minutes, so don't want to put you guys to sleep. But if you we'll make the assumption that you guys are in agreement that I clearly articulated why acquisitions are the quickest and lowest cost way to grow. And we're going to talk about an acquisition strategy. It's the whole idea of buy versus build. But perhaps the best part of an acquisition is that when you buy a competing business, you get employees, relationships and cash flow day one. When done right, most acquisitions are cash flow positive the day you buy it, which is a huge benefit relative to building a brownfield and greenfield that you have to finance for 24 months as you're going through that development. You also have employees in place, so you don't have to go out and recruit anybody, which is, we all know in this industry, employees are hard to come by. You can build revenue synergies and cost synergies, but they can be complex, and they do require financial commitment, and they're very strategy dependent. Growth doesn't happen by accident. And so I'm going to talk about a couple ways to do acquisitions, what we've seen, what we've learned through helping clients in doing this. And then I'm going to open it up for some Q&A, some questions. Well, there's some time for you guys to ask questions about whatever you want to ask. So what we've seen in helping our clients with acquisitions is that there's really 5 key success factors when doing acquisitions. 1, you gotta be proactive, you gotta build a plan. It's strategy dependent. Growth doesn't happen on accident. 2, you have to know your exit objective. And so just like the private equity groups, when they invest in a company, they know they're gonna hold it for 3, 5, or 7 years. And when they invest, they know who they're going to sell it to before they make that investment. They know who their potential buyers are. They won't invest in a company if they don't have a clear understanding of what their exit plan is. Build the right team, generate deal flow, and know your finances. So I'll expand a little bit on each one of these. So like I said, growth doesn't happen by accident. And so a key component of a successful acquisitions-based strategy is developing an acquisition target list. What markets do you want to move into? What brands, what culture, what business size do you want to target? Knowing what your ideal target is before you go down that process. Not waiting for somebody to come to you, but actually going out physically and proactively going to them. So a proactive strategy is important because it also provides flexibility to the buyer. And it helps mitigate risk. It helps lower risk in the transaction. It also helps avoid acquisition drift. So a common refrain I hear from a lot of different people in the industry, whether they're buying or selling, is if they're buying, well, you know, we're looking around, we're always looking. Okay, well, how are you looking? We just let people know we're looking. That's good. It's a good first step, but it's not a very structured, formalized process. And so what happens is, in situations like that, you run the risk of buying what comes to you as opposed to targeting what you want. It also, creating a list allows you to do something that's called reverse auction. So it allows you to basically, the consolidators do a good job of this. They go to you and say, Randy, I want to buy your shop. Let's strike a deal. I'm going to go to Carl's shop because Carl's a lot more reasonable than yours, so thanks but no thanks. Because they have that pipeline in place. And so they can always reverse auction you. I mentioned that knowing your exit objective is critical. If you don't know where you're headed, I mean, you've heard it 1,000 times. It's a cliche at this point, right? If you don't know where you're going, how do you know you're going the right way? Whatever it is. There's 1,000 different ways to say it. But the reality is, in business, it's so important to know what is the exit plan, what's your timeline, what's your estimated walkaway price, and it has nothing to do with selling. It has nothing to do with let's sell right now. It has everything to do with what's my strategy going to be to build my business in the meantime. You could say my timeline's 15 years out. Okay, what's your walkaway price? $25 million. Okay, we have 15 years to build a $25 million business. Here's how we're going to do it. Now maybe I want a $25 million price expectation, and my timeline's 18 months. Well, that, depending on the size of your business, that might be a bit challenging, but it could be doable. It just depends. So that's one of the things that makes private equity groups so good at what they do, is they have this all mapped out. They make an investment, they grow the business, they know what they're going to do before they start doing it. And that's so critical in any business. So, in fact, a lot of growth strategies are actually exit strategies in disguise. And that's one of the best ways to increase the valuation, increase your exit price, is to go out, do a couple of acquisitions, integrate them, and then when you have a larger package, turn that package over to a buyer. And so a lot of companies that we see growing, and this includes the Calibers and Service Kings of the world, they're growing because they know they have to exit. And so having that firm timeline, knowing that they have to exit in 3, 5, or 7 years, that's powerful. Building the right team. So acquisitions are sexy. There's a lot of excitement around it. Hey, I'm going to buy somebody else's business. How cool is this? But they're taking a lot of work. So having the right team in place is critical. I always say you can't be at 2 places at once. And so a good test of if you have the right team in place is, can you take a vacation for 2 weeks? And when you come back, is the place still running? Because as you start to grow, as you start to buy other businesses, as you start to build this business, you can't be in every place at once. And so building the right team, both internally and externally, is important. I know it probably comes across as self-promotional. It is slightly, but I mean, it's the reality, is that you also need a team of advisors to manage the process for you. You're going to need an attorney, you're going to need a really good tax person, and you're going to need an M&A advisor. And they all play key roles in growth, and they all play key roles in exit. Deal flow. So really non-auction deal flows is what we want. We want to be able to go out, because I know Randy, say, hey Randy, what's your retirement plan? You've got some gray hair there. I'm thinking it might be time to go. And you build that non-auction deal flow. And that's one of the best ways to identify acquisitions, is by being active, stuff like this, and talking to, I don't know if competitive is the right word, but co-business owners in the same industry as you, and seeing if there's, and identifying opportunities for partnership. It's interesting. Service King uses the word partnership all the time. When they buy somebody's business, they put a press release out to say, we've decided to partner with this business. And it just, to a certain extent, it is a partnership. But at the end of the day, you are, party A buying party B, so it's a lopsided partnership. Lastly, know your finances. One of the things, so my father taught me a lot. He did not go to college. He barely graduated high school. That's why he got in the car business. That's why a lot of people get in the car business. They're doers rather than accountants. But one of the things he taught me is his father, when he started his business, gave him a book on accounting. And my father's probably slightly dyslexic, but yet he reads the paper every single day. It takes him like 3.5 hours, so he doesn't get to work till 12 o'clock every day. But he taught himself accounting. And knowing your numbers is critical. And I know that in the industry, that's probably the exception to the rule, but knowing your numbers is critical. And that's an area that, for whatever reason, I got into numbers. I think they're kind of fun. I like reading P&Ls. I like reading income statements. So, really important to know your finances. Know how much you could lose. Project how much you could lose. Project what could go wrong in a deal. Project what your cash needs are, not just to close the transaction, but also what are you going to need in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. So knowing your numbers is really, really important. You're going to want to know where you can improve the business when you acquire somebody. What margins can you improve? Basically, how are you going to pay for the transaction? Because you're going to go out and borrow some money, most likely. How are you going to pay for this transaction? And so, one of the things that we do, we just started, all of our clients get this, it's just whenever they work with us, we just started offering it just as on a standalone product, is we have a financial dashboard. And if you're on QuickBooks or Xero, it works. If you're on BusinessWorks, BusinessWorks is funky. They don't have a good online data transmission system, so it's hard to pull the data out. But we have a dashboard, and it pulls the data from your accounting system. And rather than looking at rows of numbers, and what, for a lot of people, it's just not an attractive exercise to do, it takes that data and automatically creates charts and graphs, so you can quickly see trends by month, by quarter, by year. You can see, and it tracks kind of just the high level areas. So if you're interested in that, you can go to Subcoast /dashboard. The URL's at the bottom there. So, but the dashboard looks like this. So you can see where's your cash. You can see how your sales and profits and expenses are trending. Something that nobody in the industry looks at: working capital. If you're a distributor, working capital is huge because you have a ton tied up in inventory. For a collision repair shop, a little bit less important. I shouldn't say important. You just don't have as much tied up in. You have capital tied up in WIP, AR, and AP. But there's a lot of. Most collision repair shops have either flat or negative working capital, which is a good thing to have. So if you're interested, anyway, sales pitch is over. If you're interested, sign up, 60% off AASP. No more selling. Let's see. All right, I got about 7 minutes left. So what's it worth? How do you value a company? I was just going to go over a couple of things to keep in mind when looking at valuation, and then open up for a couple of questions. So we often hear about companies being valued as somebody sold at 5 times EBITDA, or somebody sold at 5 times, or I want 5 times for my business. A word of caution: when doing valuation, it's really important. Multiples are good as benchmarks. It's really important to go through and look at what we call DCF, IRR, hurdle rates, the way that professional investors are looking at valuation, because multiples, basically, they don't necessarily help the seller if you don't know what goes in the multiple. So a buyer's going to come in and they're going to project out the future value of the business. Okay, we're going to look at what's happening in the future, and we're going to discount that back to present. That process is going to yield a very different number than just saying I want 5 times my cash flow last year. And so it's important to look at both your DCF, your discounted cash flow, as well as your multiples, but looking at either one in isolation can be very, very dangerous. And there's lots of different things that create value. For example, maybe you have a really good brand. Well, if I negotiate a deal with Liz for 5 times $1 million, you got a $5 million deal. But if Dan's brand is no good, or his profitability is no good, and I negotiate, do you want a 5-time, are you guys comparable? You should have a higher relative valuation. So that's why, multiples are odd. But there's a lot of different things that drive value. And so it's important to recognize those, including brand, your location, your management team. Management team is huge in driving value in this industry. Your facility, your OEM certs, your operational excellence. There's a lot of financial things that drive value. There's also a lot of non-financial things that drive value. And so that's that. I'm going to open up for questions. I'm going to be here all day. Lunch, and then I'm moderating a panel in the afternoon as well. So there's lots of chances to talk. But in summary, industries consolidate in very predictable patterns over time. We will continue to see consolidation in this industry for the financial reasons I talked about, for the strategic reasons I talked about. Going forward, you have 3 options. You invest very, very heavily, you stand pat, and you invest heavily in operational excellence with the recognition that there are diminishing returns in doing that. You grow and you develop scale, or you get out. Because as this industry continues to consolidate, there's going to be increased pressures on margins. So, as my dad likes to say, get while the getting's good. keep in mind that there's this cycle of investment. Don't get stuck in the retained earning traps where the retained earnings never get reinvested in the business. If that's the case, you're gonna, from a strategic standpoint, you're gonna put the company into a death spiral. So with that, I really appreciate it. I'm happy to grow. I want to grow. I want to grow with all of you. This industry, this business has given me and my family a lot growing up, but it's changing. And so I want to be an active part of helping all of you change with it. So thank you for your time and ask away.
I got a question.
Yeah.
How much of your net income should you reinvest in the company? I'm not talking on the premise that say you're a single independent owner, and there is no room for making it any larger, maybe mechanically or finance-wise, you can maybe pull more profit out of the business since you know more. But how much do you want to put back into the company, and how much do you keep?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's two approaches. There's what I call top-down and there's bottom-up. And so bottom-up would say implies that you actually go and you look at what is the investment you're going to have to make in the coming years in specific equipment. So what we do with our clients is we look at the growth opportunity. So let's say you need to invest in certain equipment to get an OE certification, and so you actually will catalog that equipment and you'll project out what the expenses of that and when you do it, and then you basically put together a budget, an operating budget for what you want to invest. So that's the bottom up, and that's driven based off of where you want to take the business and what you need to get there. So that doesn't really answer the question that you asked, because it's going to be very specific on your specific investments in your equipment and infrastructure, what we call CapEx or capital expenditures. The other way, more what you were referring to, is what's a good benchmark to reinvest. And so that's what we call top down, where you say basically, I want to reinvest, X amount, X percent into growing the business. And so I'm always hesitant to say a specific number because it's so case dependent. It really depends on where you're going with the business first. And so, but that would be the top down. Say I want to invest 15% of my EBITDA every year in capital expenditures. And so really what the answer is what we do is we do both. We look at where you want to go, and we also look at what's that look like on a relative basis, and then we reinvest into it. To give you a little more nuance, Boyd, Gerber, because they're publicly traded, they share a lot of their numbers. They're continually, their CapEx just on operational improvements and training is a few $1 million a year. Now, granted, they're a $1 billion company, Canadian billion, so they could afford that. So that's call it less than a tenth of 0.3%. So, but it really depends on what your cash flow is, where you want to go, what sort of equipment you need, how you're getting there. There's no right or wrong answer. I think the best answer is just to have a number and then execute on it.
With the business valuation that you're talking about, I know you said there's a lot of variables, but in this industry, is there standardized, taking away where the location is, what you've done for marketing, taking all of that out and just simply looking at it from a number standpoint? Is there a simplistic version, albeit not as accurate as I'm sure you would like it to be, that you use when you're evaluating? You talked about consolidation, trying to find another business. What would you use for different baseline to get that kind of vision?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So the simplistic back of the envelope approach is to use multiples. So we either use multiples of EBITDA. So EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. That number approximates what your cash flow is. It's not exactly the same, but it's an approximation. So we use that to, we use that to normalize across different types of industries. Sorry, different types of companies within the industry. For a single location facility, you would see an EBITDA, a multiple of EBITDA anywhere in the 3 to 4 times range, and that's a widespread. You can also look at it from a standpoint of as a percentage of sales, and you'll see, you know, as a percentage of sales for a single location, 30, 40, maybe 50% of sales. Again, these are very wide ranges, and they're wide because it depends on the individual profitability level of the company you're looking at. It depends on their cost structure, it depends on the assets, it depends on all these other extraneous factors of what drives that value. But the back of the envelope stuff, those are rough ranges. The reason I hesitate using those multiples is because if you're running at, say, a 20% margin and you're running a 10% margin, and let's say everything's the same, you're both doing $1 million a year in sales. Well, if you're at 20% and I pay you $1 million, you got a 5x multiple. If I pay you $900,000, you got a 9x multiple. On paper, it sounds like you got a really good deal, but the reality is you're less profitable and you made less money, even though your sales are about the same. So that again, simplistic example of why multiples don't always necessarily, they're good to evaluate value, not to drive value.
One more question.
Yeah.
Say having a single entity that does not have any debt and it's profitable, would that affect the multiplier, or it does not matter?
It doesn't matter. So what a buyer is going to tell you, if whether you're highly leveraged or you have no debt, they're going to say, well, that's your problem. So now it benefits you in that when you sell your business, you keep a whole lot more of that money because you're not paying off all the debt. But if you, let's say you have a paint contract and you got 5 years left in the paint contract and you sell your business, most buyers are going to say, well, that's your obligation. You signed up for that. You took the money. You need to pay it off. Your debt's not my problem. I'm paying you for the value of your business, unencumbered. I'm paying you for what your business generates. My capital structure is my issue. Your capital structure is your issue. One of the things that we do when we're putting together a pro forma on the sell side for selling a business is that we'll go through there and you take out certain expenses that what we call non-recurring or non-continuing expenses, because we want to highlight the cash that your business could give to a buyer. Now, so your business will look more profitable once you take those expenses out, but you're still on the hook for your obligations. Yeah?
This is just kind of out of the blue. I mean, why have all these consolidators gone after more of the collision side rather than the mechanical side? I know the mechanical side is starting to consolidate somewhat, but it seems like it's way behind the curve compared to body.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have.
I'm thankful for it.
Why is that?
I'm in the mechanical side.
Okay. You have Monroe Muffler, which is consolidating, but the Monroe has a very interesting strategy. They are expanding within their own region, so they're not necessarily looking to go from the East Coast to the West Coast. Whereas the consolidators on the collision side are trying to go nationwide. Part of the drive behind consolidation on the collision side is you have the third party payer, the insurance provider, and they it's very costly for them to have a distributed network of service providers. On the mechanical side, you don't necessarily have that as much. So on the insurance side, there is an increasing desire to deal with large regional providers. But we still have to be careful with that too, because that's not 100%. Just because you're a large regional provider does not mean that you automatically get on the program. It doesn't mean that you are, you have a silver bullet, so to say. But that's definitely driving it. Other than that, there's a lot of opportunity on the mechanical side. A lot of opportunity for a well-capitalized organization to build a regional brand up. And because an opportunity there really becomes in marketing directly to the consumer and having the budget to do that. So you made the comment about how much do I reinvest in my business as a single shop. Yeah, that's a tough one because it's so company dependent. But when you have, call it 100 shops, and you're doing 100 million in sales, at that point you have the budget, you have the ability to go in there and reinvest on a perpetual basis in advertising and branding and whatnot, and do it in a very sustainable, meaningful way. So that's one of those areas where scale becomes really important, because if you spend $3 million, I don't know how, say your business is $5 million in revenue, and you spend $3 million in advertising, you spend 60% of your revenue in advertising. We all know that's impossible, it's not sustainable. But at $100 million, you just spent 3% of your revenues in advertising. That's kind of an okay number, and you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck across that distributed base. So,
Kind of trying to compare body shops to mechanical shops. I mean, we know I'm a mechanical shop, so I know how my ticket is split between parts and labor. Do body shops have similar things like us, mechanical? I don't know much about it. Or are they being attractive because they sell more product than labor? Or, I mean, what is the difference? Why are body shops being acquired more than mechanical shops? Is it because of their profit is generated? I'm not saying like lack of talent, because in our business, you have to have a lot of talent in diagnostic nowadays, because it changed over. It used to be R&R before, about 70%, 30% diagnostic, now it's flipped. So our money is generated through labor, not through selling parts. And then our body shop doing the same thing, or they're in a different environment.
it's a different environment. The reason, so one of the questions was why are body shops being acquired? The reality is that there's a number of large platform operators out there who are private equity backed, who have a mandate to grow. So you have 4 very large buyers in the industry right now. So for a body shop, it's a great time to sell because you have 4. There's an old saying in investment banking, which is if you have 1 buyer, you have no buyers. The more buyers you have at the table, the greater your chances of maximizing your profit are. So that's the big reason why there's so much buy-side activity on the body shop side. On the mechanical side, it's less so because you have less well-capitalized operators with a mandate to grow. So I mentioned Monroe Muffler. You have Monroe Muffler. They have an explicit strategy to grow via acquisition. Paint Distribution, Finish Master has an explicit strategy to grow by acquisition. You don't see that as much on the mechanical side yet. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean the opportunity is not there. It just means that the investment groups that want to invest in the area have invested in other asset classes, other industries before that. Which means that for somebody who has a time horizon of 7, 8, 9, 10 years, who's on the mechanical side, there's a huge opportunity to build up a business, bring on private equity capital, roll up a certain area, and then if you have a 10-year time horizon before you retire, and then turn it over to another private equity group, a larger, well-capitalized group, or maybe another strategic player in the market. All right, I've been given the time's up. Thank you very much, guys. Like I said, I'll be around all day. I have a bunch of business cards. I'm going to put them right here. So, actually, I'll put them on the back table there. I do a weekly blog. Sign up for the blog. It's free, and I just talk about business and automotive industry. So, thanks, guys.